Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. You're listening to our D&D game. I'm your host, the DM or Dungeon Master. Um let's just dive into this. Uh the setting for the prologue is Earth, the year 405 AD. I'm going to recite or paraphrase the opening narration from Disney's The Sword and the Stone. When England was young and knights were brave and bold, Uther Pendragon had died, and no one could decide who was rightful heir to the throne. It seemed that the land would be torn by war or saved by a miracle, and that miracle was the sword and the stone. So dozens of claimants flocked to London to try to pull the sword from the stone, but everybody who tries fails. So I think if you've been following the channel, you see where this is going, right? 3 years pass. So now it's 408 AD. After countless unsuccessful attempts to draw the sword, Merlin, aka Merle Lincoln from episode 1, declares a grand tournament at Christmas. Artie accompanies Ectorius, aka Ector, and Caius, aka Kay, to the tournament. And to nobody's surprise, right, Artie, aka Arthur, draws the sword from the stone. At the time, he was trying to find a blade for Caius to use. Caius had left his behind. So, of course, when Arthur pulls the sword, people can't believe it. They're astonished that it's finally happened, right? So, 12 lesser kings at this tournament immediately pledge their loyalty to Arthur. But the rest are having a hard time buying this, right? So they insist that Artie repeat the feat on the next holy day, which happens to be January 1st. That's a Catholic holy day that revolves around the Virgin Mary. At any rate, on that day, Arthur draws the sword again. But there are still those who refute his claim to the throne, right? So assassination attempts begin. And this is really where the adventure gets going. And this is the beginning of the rebellion of the Six Kings. And I should point something out for a minute. Not all of the kings in our game are human. There are giants, there are unseelie fairies, um, which in our game, by the way, most fairies are good and are considered to be seelie. Just sort of, for us, it's kind of just like slang for good. The unseelie fairies, though, have been tainted because their ancestors have the blood of the Fomorians in them. So the Fomorians were, boy, that's a lot to explain. That'd probably be a story for another day. But suffice it to say, when they interbred with the normal fairies and had offspring, the offspring were turning out weird. There was something wrong with them. At any rate, all manner of beings who thirsted for power in this dark time hate Artie, right? And want him dead. So, one of the many non human characters, by the way, at this point that I feel like I should mention is Breg, Breg. Breg was played by my son. He was a quickling monk. And he had, I mean, he still does serve Morrigan Le Fay, but because Morrigan and Arthur are a couple now, basically, in our game. So he's going to serve them both, right? And so he pledges loyalty to Artie, and he's around for years in the game. I mean, decades go by. Breg is a really big deal. Um, my son played a ton of characters in that campaign and just had bad luck. You know, he'd play a halfling and it would die, or he'd play a dwarf and it would die, or whatever. And finally, he got to this quickling, and just everything worked out for that quickling. Um, and so he would literally run across Britain looking for, he kind of acted like an advanced scout. He was also a potent warrior. He could run into an area. He would do kind of like a drive-by, kind of a version of combat where he would run in, attack, and then run out with the rest of his movement, um, and get out of the range of the other guys attacking him. So Breg was a really big deal. He was very cool. Um, and then also I mentioned Morrigan. And I said in the last video where I was talking about how her and Arthur became kind of boyfriend and girlfriend. Um, she's got a ton of sisters, and they all look alike. For whatever reason, this is a thing in Arthurian mythology, which I should say something really quick, because I guarantee somebody listening to this is thinking to themselves, that's not how it goes, right? That's not canon, or that's not continuity for what happens in the books. Here's the thing, though. Like Lancelot, um, was not originally a part of the Arthurian stories. Centuries later, the French wrote about Lancelot, and they inserted him into the original stories. The further you go back with the stories of Arthur, you start to lose a lot of the really famous stuff. You lose the Round Table, you lose Excalibur, all sorts of stuff, right? So when people talk about Arthurian continuity, I think it's pretty hard actually to nail down what is Arthurian continuity. Um, so we kind of cherry picked between all the different books and stuff over the years. We sort of did our own thing. Our Morgan Le Fay, for instance, is not villainous, which bothers a lot of people. So I mentioned to him, she's got all these sisters who look just like her, and some of them are not so great. Um, so there's that. And then even with Guinevere, um, people were like, Guinevere was very controversial in our game, where a lot of people sort of wanted her to, because they thought the story of Guinevere was depressing. And they just didn't want to play in an Arthurian campaign if things were going to go the way they thought they were going to go, right? And so I pointed out to him, I said, weirdly enough, she's another one of these characters where she literally has sisters who are also named Guinevere who look exactly like her. There's a story later where one of her sisters keeps trying to take her place, and you can't always tell who's the real Guinevere and who's the fake Guinevere, who is the one on the throne right now and who is not. And so I was telling people, keep that in mind with the Lancelot stuff later, that there's multiple possibilities there for what's really going on. And then the other thing I feel like I should mention is when I mentioned Spelljammer earlier, there's these two groups called the Xenos and the Seekers. The Seekers are the good guys. They're all about what really happened, right? But the Xenos are the ones that kind of are winning. And one of the things they do is they rewrite history to suit their own agenda. And so, um, in our game world, there's going to be what really happens in Camelot, And then in contrast to that, there's going to be what was written down in the books that survive until the 20th century. That is the stuff that most of the players grew up reading. Does that make sense? So I kept telling people, don't think you know where this is going. Don't make assumptions, so on and so forth. But at any rate, um, the um, oh, I just forgot the name of it now. The Rebellion of Six Kings. Um, Game of Thrones was on TV at the time, and we were big Game of Thrones fans. And that was kind of our attempt to try to mimic that through the language of Dungeons and Dragons. So uh, we did that. We had a really good time. I should probably also mention with Breg, Quickling Monk, we yeah, I'm a very big advocate of when it comes to D&D, if there's something in the book you don't like, you know, the DM is the final authority on the matter, right? He can change anything he wants. And so we made some changes to the Quickling from the way they are in the book. So I figure a bunch of people are going to hear, me mention a Quickling and they're going to assume it's exactly like it is in the books. It is not. If I had to pick one thing that we were particularly inspired by, it would probably be um, the Grant Gustin version of the Flash. Um, but yeah, at any rate, you get the idea. Um, I should mention the epilogue. At that point, it's the year 409 AD, and Lancelot is born to King Ban in uh, a place called Benoit, which is a sub kingdom of France. Um, and Lancelot later was played by Josh Boggs, who we mentioned him in an earlier game where he had the PCs go fight a vampire when they were all level one characters. And a lot of people who hear that story are like, wow, that's not great. You know, they're not really ready for that yet. Uh, Josh, for whatever reason, um, he would show up to games, like he would miss games, he would show up late. He wanted to play Lancelot. And he would sit, I remember he sat down at the table one day and he was just like, all right, I'm going to show you losers how you actually play D&D or something like that, And we were like, what's wrong with you? Like, why would you start a conversation like that? Or, like we're playing D&D to have a good time, and he was being like weirdly competitive and acting like, he wanted to win D&D and then he was going to rub it in our faces that whatever he did better than us or something like that. I mention that because then that is going to tell you a lot about the Lancelot in our game world, right? Is he was just um he caused problems. I'll put it that way. At any rate, I'm gonna shut up. I think this is plenty long. I hope you enjoyed the video. If so, hit like. It really helps the channel out. Leave us a comment, hit subscribe, ring the bell, all that jazz. And we'll see you in the next one. Bye.